The role of marketing in business. Well, much has been said, written, and discussed on this topic, yet a topic that keeps on evolving each and every day. The identification, anticipation, and satisfaction of customer needs and wants in a profitable and socially responsible manner. A basic definition of marketing. But in different contexts, in different cultures, across different countries and different industries, this definition keeps on getting redefined almost every single day. In a modern post-pandemic world, or in a world resurging ahead from the pandemic, what is the role of marketing? Let's discuss about this and more with a very exciting and dynamic personality who is joining us on the show today, who is Thilanka Abeywardena, President of the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing. Thilanka, absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you for inviting me.
Thilanka, how has the pandemic really reshaped marketing across different categories? It can be FMCG, it can be fashion, it can be even a B2B sector. How exactly has the pandemic reshaped and made us rethink marketing in this post-pandemic world? You are someone who is in the front line in the action. You have front row seats to view the action. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, thank you, Tarindu. I think the role that is changing on the marketers front really starts with our consumer, because we as marketers have to understand the consumer we have been serving has completely changed. I think that's where the change of role actually comes into play. Because, I mean, go back 2 years, and imagine a world doing all this education online, doing e-commerce at this scale that is happening today.
Unthinkable initially.
Unthinkable, exactly. And imagine us telling parents, I'm going to convert all my classes like 2 years back, and the expression of parents and today, how everything has changed.
Thilanka, I just want to say, 2019 end, when I teach IT and virtual working, I used to tell my students, I said, in about 10-20 years from now, I might get up in the morning, sit in front of the computer and start teaching you.
Yes.
10-20 years from
Yes.
now. But it happened 3 months later.
Absolutely. So you can see the acceleration of digital transformation that has taken place across, irrespective of which industry you are in. So your consumer is completely a different person now. So I think even I would like to quote, there is a McKinsey study that talks about the post-pandemic consumer, how it has changed. There is like 6 areas that they say. I'm not going to talk all 6, but one of the examples of those changes is your house has become a command central, because from one side you're cooking and the other side you are doing the online education, working from home. So these dynamics, even in the post-pandemic world, are going to stay. Maybe not 100%, but your consumer is not going to go back to where he or she was. So I think that's where your role really as a marketer has started changing, because you need to understand whatever the industry it is, now you have a different consumer, different customer to serve. So in that context, I think as marketers, that's number one, you have to understand who that new customer or consumer is. And next one is, look at your channel strategy. Your channels have been completely disrupted now. The way you reach out to your customer. Earlier, having a e-channel or, online channels probably would have been, something that you brag about, like take pride in.
An optional thing or
exactly.
Luxury.
And also like a USP. You say, by me having that is like a unique selling proposition, but it has become the bare minimum now. I mean, if you don't have that, you don't exist in business. So this is another example. So with all of these, as a marketer, how you serve and how you serve your consumer, because I think marketer's key role is really serving your consumer. I think that's a responsibility. There is so many other things you can do, but your consumer is at the heart of everything you do. So I think with that, your role has changed. And the third thing I'd like to highlight after the channels is, look at the skill set that you need now. You are a marketer 2 years back to marketer today. Do you really have the skill set that you need to face the future challenges in the workplace? You have to be digitally savvy, not just digital marketing. I think that's one of the things that sometimes marketers probably get wrong, where you think it's about digital marketing. It's not. It's really being digital savvy in everything you do. So I think I can go on, the list goes on, but I think in general, you have to understand your dynamics have changed, your playground has changed, and your consumer has changed. So get used to it and, adopt and, reimagine your role.
That's a great start to our discussion, Thilanka. Sure. I want to ask you this. As marketers, we always try to avoid being myopic or being short-sighted. But I personally believe that to a large extent, this pandemic also showed how myopic a lot of companies actually are, because when the pandemic hit, instead of trying to really understand how the customer mindset will change, a lot of them jumped into the conclusion, okay, customers will be indoors, that means now they will stop consuming, and they started cutting down on production facilities, they started cutting down on their production capacity, shipping capacity. We saw ships that were returning almost empty, but the consumers proved us wrong. The more they spend time at home, they realize, hey, you know what, I need this addition here, I need a home gym kit. One very important part to your command center, Thilanka, is the home gym.
Yes.
And they decided, okay, look, you know what, we need a gym here, or we need this audio system, we need better laptops, we need that. They started spending more money inside the homes, and companies were simply caught off guard. That means we probably didn't have a very good understanding about the buyer behavior. But in your experience, given the research exposure you have, Thilanka, how has the buyer behavior shifted due to the pandemic?
Yes, so you're right actually. I think, but I think to be fair by our organizations as well, I think we all learn about risks management, what to do with it, handling, working in a crisis. I think we all have, gone through a module or two in all our education.
We live, we learn.
Exactly. And I think when the pandemic hit, I don't think anyone was prepared for this. I think probably we all had the knowledge in the book, and we have faced our share of risks. I think in a country where
But this was unprecedented.
Exactly, unprecedented. And I mean, we all have seen this in movies, but really facing it in the real world, I'm very sure everyone got into a shock at first. I think at the beginning, I think that's why it's short-sighted. More than calling it short-sighted, I think they were caught off guard. They didn't really know how to handle. I think, but the good thing is, in a very short period of time, they started understanding this context and how this landscape is changing or it's evolving. So the buyer behavior, I think, it says that some of even worldwide, most of the consumers, I don't really have a percentage for Sri Lanka, but I think most of the consumers made their very first e-commerce purchase online, because before that they would have doubted. I mean, I myself can say personally, I mean, I always doubted about making purchases online when it comes to garments, because how can you actually be very sure, because you always have the experience of going into a store. But with the pandemic, people had to really challenge the way they have been thinking,
Sure.
The consumers had to change their behaviors and really get used to it. And that along with that, the e-commerce, another thing that comes is the availability that is really impacting the brand loyalty and the brand stickiness. Because what actually happens is when you're making a purchase to the store, and sometimes with the practical supply chain challenges, sometimes the brand that you want may not be available. It could be because of your online purchase, or it could be because of supply chain or delays of production due to the restrictions and all that. But that is actually giving a window for your competitor to come and take your share. And it's actually giving also a window for the consumers to love another brand. So I think with all of this, the consumer, whilst you ask about the consumer behavior change, you can see how it's also impacting because of the supply chain and all these changes that are taking place, how your consumers are really playing with it. And that's why it's very important for for the marketers to really understand this. And one of the things I would like to highlight, since we're specifically talking about marketing today, now there is C2B, that is customer to the business. So social media is actually giving us that the weave where the consumer or the customer is giving you the feedback. It's telling us a lot of information. There's so much data that is out there. So that's why you need to closely monitor and understand how these buyer behaviors are changing and act accordingly.
Some good points there. Thilanka, we are going to come back to more details on that. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break to discuss the role of the modern day marketer. Welcome back to Bisnomics. We are in conversation with Thilanka Abeywardena, the president of the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing, regarding the role of the modern day marketer and what marketing truly means in the business world. Thilanka, how has the role of the marketer changed today? Because we saw the pandemic coming in, we saw how marketing was shifting and changing, and not just a shift of trends. This is a complete paradigm shift. We see a dimension shift today. In your experience, today, what does it really mean to be a marketer? Is it just to satisfy the customer, or is it something beyond that? Because from my understanding, everybody is satisfying the customer. Buyer loyalties are challenged. So how does the marketer's role change?
Absolutely. I think sometimes the role of marketer, people actually have different ways of looking at this position. When some people think it's about sales, sometimes people think it's communications, and some might think it's advertising. So sometimes because of the different ways of different views points that you have about the role, people have different views. But I think it really, in addition to serving your consumer, because your consumer is at the heart of everything you do, I think as a marketer, you need to understand what is the value that you bring for the organization. I think that's where the brand really plays a huge role. I think as every marketer, you need to understand whatever the brand that you have at hand, the value of your brand, and what kind of relationship you are creating between this brand and your audience. So I think sometimes people tend to think this communication is the way to do this. They always think it's a campaign and that's the end of it. But in reality, if you really know how to strategize and really understand how to bring that value to your organization, that's where I think the marketer's role has really changed. I'm not saying marketers are not doing that. There are so many marketers who have made their way to the boardroom. But I think more and more marketers need to do that and understand how this brand can actually add more value. Let me take a more national example. I think we as a country, now we are actually in a current situation. I think the kind of imports, the restrictions that we are doing. So in a situation like that, the export income, if we can get more and more income to the country, that's going to be a massive deal,
So I think a huge boon to our economy.
Exactly. So one of the areas probably marketers can play a huge role is now currently there are so many raw material and things that are actually going in the bags without proper labeling or proper branding. Tea is the best example. Decades back, we didn't really have a brand for tea. It was just someone else put
Just
the
black
brand.
tea.
Black tea, and it was just going in bags where someone actually put the brand and they marketed. So that is possible when you have the marketing thinking with the kind of thinking that you have. So for any organization of any size, the value you can bring as a marketer is such that the kind of relationship you have with your consumer, keeping the consumer at the heart or the center of everything you do, and also having the right relationship between your brand and your audience. Here I think I would also like to mention ethical side of marketing, because I think the current consumer or the customer really expects purpose-driven brands. They will not really go for the price cut. Obviously, when the things are tight, price cuts always play like like short term. But I think above and beyond, we have seen, I don't want to quote examples, you have seen examples when the ethics come into play, people actually choose ethical brands, and when there is a bigger purpose behind whatever is being served, products or services, people tend to really turn at such organizations. So I think these roles can actually be played by marketers, so that you're actually making a long-term relationship with your customer, which is not a transactional one, which is actually value, which is creating value for your organization, which is obviously going to be converted back to the revenue that you bring, retention that you bring, and the brand value that you bring, which is definitely what as you asked, the role of marketer has to change so that your organization finally benefits with what you do.
That's a beautiful perception to have regarding the industry, Thilanka. Let's talk about digital marketing. Everybody is talking about it, and we saw even in Sri Lanka how the digital payments had a spike during the pandemic as well. But outside Colombo, do we really see enough adoption? And what is holding back Sri Lankans from going and engaging more in the space of e-commerce and digital business?
Right. So I'll take a step back and I'll start with the skills side. So World Economic Forum says in 2025, the number one sought after job in the world is going to be data scientist. And number 4 is going to be digital marketer. So there's like a 20 list. I'm just going to quote these two. So you can see what's actually happening. As we all are in social media, right? So every minute that we browse and do something on our mobiles and social media, imagine the amount of data that we create.
So, big data, as we call it.
Exactly. So in the time to come, I think the digital marketer's role is getting strengthened and strengthened, because earlier we used to segment STP, segmentation, targeting, positioning, but now actually segment equals 1. because actually it's individually you have to target people's needs and wants and what kind of aspirations that they have.
Each customer is a market by itself.
Exactly. So it's like a segment equals one. So in a context like that, the digital marketer's role is very crucial. And coming to your point about making sure the country, the digital divide or whatever you call it, the democratization of the skills and the knowledge, I think Sri Lanka really, you can see like so many people are on Facebook. There's no doubt about it, right? I mean, our mobile connections are higher than our population, and there's so many Facebook users in the country. It's really where you put that to good use is where we have the challenge. I think people are savvy with social media, but to do what is the question? I think they all
are we doing it for the right productive economic reasons is the real question.
Exactly. So I think, but in the same time, you saw during the pandemic, some people how home businesses, how it really grew, because when the bigger organizations were struggling for a little while, because they have a lot of things to sort out as a bigger, large organization, smaller home-based, community-based ones started serving the community. So digital marketing, I think it's really important. I mean, even at Slim, we are doing that. We are making education affordable. So that's why we are different. We are actually making sure marketing education is affordable. That's why we have marketing in Sinhala, marketing in Tamil, digital marketing. So that's what we try to do, because it's not about making sure it's like a Colombo-centric profession. So, but it's a long way. I think it has more work to do. And it's just that we have to identify while you are in social media, what more can you do with it? How can I do an enterprise or a small startup with it? And small, how to schedule an ad. It doesn't have to be, the end of the world where you learn all the techniques. But you start small and really see how that brings you value to what you do.
Let's talk about the skills needed for a marketer today. Is it beyond just being able to come up with advertising, etc.? Because as you said, sometime back, marketing was advertising. That's what they used to say. But today, I believe a marketer needs a plethora of skills, as you said, digital, being able to build relationship. Now, you are a modern day marketer, Thilanka, and you see a lot of young marketers. What makes the cut? Who makes the cut? What are the skills they need to be successful?
Right. So I think when the moment that you decide to become a marketer, I think the first thing that you should really think is your value to the organization is the revenue that you bring, is the retention rates that you bring, and it's whatever the value that you create. It can be different other terms. So that's the number one thing you should understand as a marketer. It's not about the beautiful, I mean, campaigns are important. I'm not saying no. We all have done campaigns, so it's important. But you should, as a marketer, understand where your ROI really comes in and the return on investment. It's not, earlier marketing was looked at as a cost center, where you think, okay, it's a cost.
How can we run the most ads at the lowest cost?
Exactly, and it's like more about a cost center. But now that's no more the case. You actually put marketing as an investment, because that investment to give you returns. So that's how the modern day. I mean, I think even in the past it was like that, but probably over years of time, I think now currently what we are looking at is ROI. So it's not a cost; it's actually an investment in your business. So in that context, I think it's very important for marketers to be very data-driven. Data-driven marketing is absolutely important. Even we advocate for that, and we really try to educate more and more and have programs and have workshops and educate our marketers with how to be data-driven. And also even consumer side of the research, understanding your consumer. Even from the Slim Research Bureau, we recently did a study about COVID-19, how it has impacted the food behaviors of the country.
Any interesting findings to share?
Yeah, so one of the things is people say that they know nutrition is very important, but when the food process, the making the food process, they actually do not know how to make sure it's nutritious. They know it's important, but in the process they have a challenge.
They know why, but they don't know how.
How? That's a surprising fact. And the other thing that came out was people have a huge, fear of the supply chain, how my food comes to my home now, because of the pandemic, because who is going to touch that food? Has someone sneezed on the food? People have actually, even in that research, people even go to that extent and say that, saying, I don't know whether someone has sneezed on my, the fruits and whatever that comes to my home. So that study we have published, it's publicly available. So we see many people are downloading that and, making use of it, because then the way you look at, as a marketer in a food chain or a supply chain, you should quickly understand to ensure that, bring that message out and say how safely you handle. I think some brands are actually doing that. So likewise, I think coming to the skills is, I think number one is you have to be digitally savvy. The kind of skills, I don't think we really have time to go with all of those. But number two, you have to be very insight driven, have an open mind, what's really happening, what are the trends, and be research, know how to get those research and make use of it. And the next is the brand management piece. I really want to highlight that. I think it's universal, whatever pandemic or not, being a proper brand manager and bringing value to your organization is important.
Thilanka, in these days, beyond just the product, what else is the brand to a customer? Because we know the importance of branding. I mean, we both know the history of branding was a simple identification on the cows. But today, people consume the brand more than the product.
Absolutely.
Now, what exactly is a brand meaning to customers in today's context?
Right. I think if you look at some brands globally, some brands have a value which is higher than some GDPs.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's the power of a brand. That means the moment that even if you take out all your intangible assets and all of those,
it's the name of the company.
Exactly, the name of the company. It's the trust that you build over a period of time through rigorous efforts, so many things that you build. So I think what is brand for a customer is, it's like, let me tell you with a simple example. Now say, now we are in a studio, we are discussing, and you and I are having a discussion. My brand is, when I walk out of this room, what people say about me.
What they say when you're not there.
Absolutely. I think brand is something like that. I mean, that's a very simple example.
But you hit the nail right on the head.
Exactly. It's something like that. That means what actually people perceive of your organization. Because your organization, without a name, A, B, C, D, whatever it is, you have buildings, you have people, you have machinery. There is a huge value to it. But all that packaged into one tiny logo and that name, that's how people perceive you. That's the value people have for your organization. So I think that's the simplest. I really, made it a very simple definition.
And as you very correctly said, sometimes you might find a handbag from a famous brand for $10,000 or so, but the production cost is like $10 or $20.
Exactly. It could be like that. So then I think that's where I think what people say about you as a brand and how much they value you, because that's why I said the purpose becomes important. Why do you exist? What's your vision? What's your mission? What's your positioning? I think sometimes we all think these are like books and theoretical things, but actually speaking, for a marketer, for you to identify where your brand is and what's my vision, so why do I exist as in the brand? Why does the brand exist and what do they do? All that is very important. So I think I can go on, but I think that's the best way to put it.
Thilanka, do you see that brands are becoming very selective with regard to their investments? We saw recently the Olympics, so many sponsors pulling out, so many brands saying we don't want to be associated with you. So do you think that the pandemic has forced the brands to really become selective with their spending and investment?
I think definitely brands have started, there is a percentage shift towards digital, which is huge. I think they are repurposing their money, because how can you do physical marketing, right? I mean, you can't be doing trade promotions or out there taking those things. So I think there's a definite shift towards the digital marketing. But from what I hear, we don't have a quantification or any survey as such, but from what I hear from the local marketers, because as Slim we interact with so many marketers, what we hear is none of them have really cut down on, cut downs have taken place, but none of them have really cut down on the work they do. Maybe it's optimized, maybe if you earlier had like 10, now you're doing the same work with 8 because you have optimized and found better ways to do it. But instead of pulling out, I think it's just that it's really happening and work is happening. Agencies are busy. I can see from the fraternity, agencies are busy. Marketers are doing a lot of things. But it's just that you are getting, instead of more than cutting down, it's that you're getting more value and of the pot of money that you have.
Thilanka, what about harnessing loyalty? Because loyalty has become quite a scarce component in today's business world. So many brands vying for you as a customer or offering you something better than the other. It's difficult to stay loyal to a brand, and brands find it very difficult to harness loyalty from the customers. In your experience, how does a brand harness loyalty from the customer?
I think in today's world, it's really being a trustworthy, authentic brand. I think the era of, I think if you look at the advertising years back, not only in Sri Lanka, even globally, exaggerations and those things really worked. But I think today's world, authenticity is the number one factor.
Being original,
Being
you.
original, being you. It doesn't have to show off and be someone whom you are not. It applies to people, it applies to brands. I think number one thing I can say, if you want loyalty from your customer, is be honest, be authentic. And sometimes your customers will really embrace you more for being original and authentic and sometimes upfront and maybe saying sorry than trying to cover something up. So that's where I think it again, sorry, I'm not trying to repeat, but I come back again and again for the purpose. Again and again to the C2B, that means customer to business. You have to really have a ear listening to your customer. So I think the simplest way to put it is be an original, authentic brand that really has a purpose, which is not a fabricated purpose, that you're true to that purpose and truly live by that purpose, loyalty will follow.
Thilanka, as you very correctly said, there's so much of marketing activity, agencies are busy, so much of communication, but that also means lots of clutter. What is your advice to a marketer to get the message through that clutter, to break the clutter and to reach the hearts and the minds of the customer? What is your advice to a marketer of today?
Yes, actually it's very difficult. I'll say what I know, with my experience, but it's very difficult in a time like this. But I think number one is you need to know what your audience is. Okay, so the clutter, the number one thing for you to know is what is that audience that I'm going after. So there's so many different sizes and different kind of audiences. Pick that right audience so that your clutter is minimum, and then you know how to navigate through that. That's number one. So your audience. Number two, find something that matters to that audience. It can be fun or it can be serious, so that's depending on the audience, but find that big idea or the message that your audience will resonate well and will respond to. And number three, there are so many Me Too's. Most of the clutter is about Me Too's, right? I mean, same kind of thing. I think you have to find that different space for your brand or your campaign so that you get noticed. I think if you know your audience well, if you have a big idea that resonates well with your audience, because you can have the best idea in the world, but if your audience really, it's totally irrelevant for your audience, then you fail. So number one, audience. Number two, you need to have that right idea to cut the clutter. And number three is you really need to understand how you place through that clutter in a time like this. But having said that, I think it's going to be very difficult in a digital world, because there's so much, right? I mean,
so many channels,
and imagine even if you get your mobile, when you scroll down the amount of content, and after a while you can't even find what you saw. So it's difficult, but but again, you see memorable things we all remember, right? If there is something unique, something that is not a Me Too, people remember. So I think if you follow these, I'm very sure you can cut through the clutter. It's challenging, very difficult, but definitely possible.
The role of women in the workplace. Well, what does Thilanka think about it? Let's find that out on the other side of this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics. We are in conversation with Thilanka Abeywardena, who is the president of the Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing. Thilanka, we've discussed a lot about marketing. I know that's your forte. But I also want to bring up quite a key burning issue in this country, in my perspective as well, women in the workplace. So much being spoken about. But the question is, are we doing enough? Are we walking the talk? And is it just an issue limited to women, or is this a broad economic problem? What are your thoughts?
Yes, Tarindu, I think let me start from where you stopped your question. That is, many people think when women come forward and talk about equal pay or workforce, workplace support, many think it's a women's issue. I think that's the first mindset or mentality that we need to challenge, because this is not a women's issue. This is actually national economic concern. Because why I'm saying that is, if you look at our university system, more than 50% are women. Like so many graduate, I mean, in some programs, it's like 60-70%, so many women are graduating. But is it really reflected in the boardroom? Is it reflected in our policymakers, parliament. I don't think it's really reflected because there is a gap. That means you have so many qualifying women coming out of the university system, even private sector universities and all that. This is, I'm talking about government universities, but I'm sure the percentage is much higher on private universities. So that there's a leakage in the pipeline. That means these women don't really remain in work until they come to the top of the organization. So as I think it's very important, I think even Slim is also trying to influence these discussions at the right forums. That is, we need policies that will support so that women can remain in work. And how do we do that? I'll tell you a simple example. I mean, do we have a proper certified daycare system in the country so that peacefully a mother can continue with their work and there's a safe place to keep their child? Do we really have healthy home cooked? I think home cooked food business is fairly good. I think it's a big relief again. But I think like that, how do we have such systems in place so that women can actually remain in work? And how is the work-life balance at the workplaces? And how does the employers treat your female employees? So for an example, can you, as a woman, can you actually go through your maternity of 6 to 7 months and come back and really start from where you stopped and still have your career progression? So these are questions. So I think I think some employers, I must really say, I mean, there are so many, even I myself, there are organizations that really looks after your employees. So it's not stereotyping all organizations. But I think in general, there's more work that we need to do. I think especially from policy front, there's more work that we need. So we are in a better place, obviously, but I think there's more work that needs to be done in the future. The most important thing is understanding this is not an issue of women. This is an issue of the country, so that more women being in work, they can bring more income to the household, children will have better lives, so the domestic prosperity will go up. So it's actually an economic issue.
And I believe the men of this country also has a big role to play in encouraging more women to remain in the workplace and the workforce.
Absolutely. I think sometimes, when we have women's related forums, I feel when you have an audience full of women, we are not solving this problem.
You're not addressing the right
We
crowd.
are not. Actually, we should have more men in these audiences than women, because they are the ones who are in, I mean, if women have an issue, that means men are the higher percentage. So that means if you want a solution, that higher percentage of women have to understand, embrace and support and help turn tables around. So I always advocate, I mean, even at Slim we try to do that. Our women inclusion initiatives has a male project chair. He's the one who is leading. He's the one champions that. So likewise, I think more and more men needs to be in this picture, so that you are addressing that. So there's no question about it.
So gentlemen, we have a national economic problem which we need to get involved and solve, as Thilanka says as well. I think some very important point that we all have to solve this issue.
Of course.
The issue of sexual harassment is a very sensitive topic, and we saw the Me Too movement gaining a lot of traction overseas, and now increasingly even in Sri Lanka this is being spoken of. Thilanka, this is a very sensitive topic, I understand, but how bad is the situation in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I think last week also when I was actually studying about it, I realized digital side of online harassment itself, within a year there had been 400, but this is, I'm talking about online harassment, but there's like close to I think 2,000 plus, I can't exactly recall the number now, but so many cases of harassment. This is what is reported. So I think many victims shy away from the system because they don't really want to go in front and repeat their experience and say, because then it's like repeating everything in your mind.
And it's something not pleasant at all.
Not at all, and it's not helping you. So I think number one thing, I think probably as marketers, as organizations, media stations, I think we all can, if possible, do is we have to empower the victim versus victimizing the victim more. I think sometimes we see the victim getting victimized even more by the system, sometimes by the media. It happens. So the ethical marketing, ethical reporting really comes into play in a situation like that. And also workplace harassment side, I think we try to think of these as taboo, not to discuss about this. If something happens, they say, okay, don't try to discuss this, forget it. and move on. I think these things have to stop. I truly think men have a huge role to play being an ally to your colleagues. I think not everyone, I always believe whether it's a man or woman, not everyone, it's actually how you are as an individual. So we can't stereotype people. But I think that's where I think workplace, you need to have the right policies that encourages women to come, stand up and do this. Public transportation, I think what kind of protection do we have, especially for our young school going kids, is there protection? So I think that's a topic on its own to go on and on about, but I think truly from my angle, I think we have to encourage and empower the victim so that now actually the one who does it nicely go to the society and the victim hides.
Correct.
We have to
It
turn the
has to be the other
table,
way
it's
around.
supposed to be the other way. The victim has to come forward.
And you raised a very important point there, and I think something we all need to remember is that men have a responsibility to hold other men accountable to be better men. That's something very important, and hope key takeaway message from our discussion as well, Thilanka.
Absolutely.
Thilanka, let's talk about government policy. Now, for an issue of this scale, of this nature, I believe proper government policy is of absolute vitality. What government policies are needed to create an equal opportunity workplace for the women and to encourage the women to stay in the workplace?
Right. So I will speak about this at a very high level because
Absolutely.
I think since I may not be the subject matter expert on the policy side, but I think it's very important from one side before going into the government, the organizations, at least the top 100 organizations. We know every year that there's such list comes out. So these organizations to start embracing this, and you bring a culture. I think culture is very key. So having the right culture and have policies, very strict policies for such incidents, and also encouraging women to speak up. And I think from the government side as well, I think that's where I even spoke about how can we bring in policies to empower women more. So I think we sometimes have a lot of investments and support for the entrepreneurship side and all that, which is very good, which is great. But we also need, women needs an extra support of breaking those hurdles in between that journey. So one of the example that I said was the daycare system. I think I'm always advocating that whatever the forums that I go to, because the moment that you actually have, whether you're a working mom or whether you are running a business of your own, and the moment that you have a child, your landscape completely changes. And I mean, unless you have a safe place, if you have your grandparents or a safe place to leave your child, mothers, how educated they are, they might make a choice, this is not working, I'm going to stay back.
And a problem I see is the society expects the woman to stay back at home.
That's mostly what happens. And also that I think that's again a broader discussion about stereotyping the roles, what's the role of mother, inclusive parenting, and how the role of mother and father. But I think naturally I'm talking about the society currently. Mothers do that. I'm more explaining the current situation. So it has to change, obviously, so that there is more sharing. Let me quote something. Sheryl Sandberg, who is from Facebook, I think, Lean In Movement. So Sheryl Sandberg said, if we want to see 50% women in the boardrooms, we need to say 50% men sharing the household work. It sounds, little bit of, light, but it's very true.
Very deeper meaning.
It's very deeper meaning. So I really love that saying because that's the truth, right? I mean, unless you share, so that's the ideal. But this is more from the current context. I think that's where women actually, think of, taking a step back and drop out.
I kind of feel you're giving me some future advice as well here.
Yes, take it. Free advice, of course. So I think it's very important. So I think maybe it's not really immediately relevant for the economic side of our discussion, but I think even for women, it's very important whom your partner is, what kind of questions you ask those, because I always believe it's a partnership, right? In a household, it's a partnership.
It's not an acquisition. It's a merger.
So exactly. So ask the right questions and make sure you are having a very comfortable journey, because then all of these will come into place. But government side, I think, as I said, we need policies that protect women from one side, that's the harassment side, and we also need for economic protection for women, so that there is ways that they can engage in work. And even McKinsey says if we just by addressing gender equality, Sri Lanka has the potential of adding 25 billion USD by 2025.
Kind of covering the deficit we have.
Exactly, by 2025.
Yes.
So, but this is before pandemic. Probably the numbers must have
Yes,
changed.
but still there is so much opportunity
That's
there.
that's the point.
Yes.
So it's about the opportunity. Maybe the number might change, but huge opportunity.
Thilanka, on a final note, quickly, if you could take the next 2 minutes and just share some advice with all the young women leaders and the women executives and employees who are watching this show, the delicate art of balancing work, family, and also keeping the balance going. You've achieved it to a great success. How do you do that?
Right. So I think the number one advice I can say is take one day at a time. I think you can have a great strategy. Even I have a lot of ambitions ahead of myself. My number one strategy is take one day at a time, because I also have a small daughter, so who is just 1 year, 3 months. So that's like a very young age where mother's attention is needed a lot. So I think the number one advice to juggle with work-life balance and everything is take one day at a time. Have a longer term strategy, but take every day at a time. That's number one. And the second advice I want to say is, when you feel like quitting, that's the exact moment you should really hold on to things. Quitting is easy, very easy, because there comes a time. I mean, I also have gone through it, because when it comes to postpartum, there is a time that comes, how am I going to handle all this? And there comes some decisions to take. So that's exactly the time when you feel like quitting. You should not quit, and find, use your strength and, imagination, and find new ways to deal with it, because quitting is easy, staying is hard. So my second advice is, when you feel like quitting, that's exactly the time to hold on to things much harder.
Thilanka, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your valuable thoughts on marketing, and most importantly, on the role of women in the workplace. I think I'm quite sure you shared lots of valuable insight with all our viewers on what needs to be done, and wishing you good luck with all your future endeavors in your professional life and your personal life as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Tanindu. Enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Pleasure is always mine.
Yes.
Ladies, if you feel like quitting, remember that's the exact moment you need to hold on to and keep pursuing your career journey. And men, we have a responsibility in order to make sure that we hold other men accountable to be better men. And wishing you a very good and a profitable week ahead. I will see you with the next episode. This is Bisnomics.